to give you the quick little commercial. This is sponsored by the Horticultural Society. The Horticultural Society is a membership organization, so what pays for Cassidy and me to be here doing these workshops live is your memberships. So if you are not a member of PHS, why not? Get on it. phsonline.org. Get a membership today and keep these workshops coming. The other little piece of advertising I had to add is the PHS Harvest 2020 program, which is an awesome new program, something I really can get my green thumbs around. What we have done is we have challenged 100,000 people to grow food for themselves and for others. And so you can grow for yourself. You can grow enough to share with yourself and your family. You can grow enough to share with a food bank or soup kitchen, or you can do both of those, and you can donate so that we can help others to also grow enough to feed themselves in a food bank. So if you want to find out more about Harvest 2020, go to phsonline.org. So today we're talking about raised bed gardening. And this is a beginner's class. So if you are already a little bit experienced, bear with us as we cover the bare necessities of how to and why to grow in a raised bed. Let's start with the why. Why would you want to grow in a raised bed? Well, here in Philadelphia, I don't know where everybody is from, but the majority seem to be from Philadelphia. And what we are trying to do in Philly is grow where there's no soil. So rather than try to dynamite down, we bring in a structure of some sort to raise soil up. So we'll bring, instead of dynamiting down, we'll bring soil in. So if you are in a situation where you have no soil, where you have, say, only concrete or blacktop or a driveway or sidewalk that you want to grow on, where you are growing on soil that is maybe questionable because there was a building there and there's possibly lead, paint, or other contaminants in the soil, you would not want to grow in that soil and you would want to raise up. Trying to think of other reasons. Aesthetic reasons. Some people like to grow in raised beds because that it gives a really discrete space to grow in. And it makes it really easy for ADD people like me to go out and attack a 3x3 or a 4x4 space and actually finish it before our mind goes on to the next task. So those are kind of the whys of raised beds. What do we want to use to make our raised beds? Well, we want to use absolutely anything that we can get our hands on. We can go out and we can buy raised bed material. We could use they're over there. We can use rocks and bricks and stone if that's what we have on our space. We can use plastic. I'm going to show a bunch of them, but I'm going to just talk first, and then we'll walk through, and I'll show you examples. Most people like to build their raised beds. When people say raised beds, automatically most of us think of little 4x8 raised up out of lumber rectangles or 4x4 rectangles. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because the kind of wood that you use is important if you're going to use wood. Wood is the quickest way to get a bed together in a hurry, unless you buy a kit, and I'm going to show you a couple of kits in a little bit. But lumber is really easy, and there's really nothing magical about the 4x8 bed or the 4x4 bed. It's just that if you have a regular car, you can go to the hardware store, the lumber yard, the box store, and you can buy 3 pieces of 8-foot lumber. And you can get them into your car. If you start making something bigger, like 10 feet or 12 feet, then you're not going to fit that in your car, and you're going to have to wait until you can borrow somebody's van or truck or something like that. So that's why so many people go with the 4x8 bed. They think it's magic, but truth of the matter, it's convenient. So what kind of wood do you want to use? If you're really, really, really wealthy, go get cedar. But generally, people use lumber from the lumber yard. Pine is the easiest to get. You don't want to use pressure treated wood if you can help it. I use interior pine or birch or whatever it is that is convenient at the store. And I know that it's going to last me 4 or 5 years before it starts to fall apart, especially at the corners. But I also know that opinions change and situations change. And I know that in 4 or 5 years, I'm going to need to rethink my garden and rebuild it. So at that point, my wood is telling me it's time to redesign. So let's decide at that point, do we want the beds to face the way they did? Do we want the beds where they were? Do we want to move things? Has shade changed so that we want to move it to a sunnier spot? Or so 5 years is a good time. And so I highly recommend using untreated lumber. Can you use treated lumber? Well, the jury's still out on that. They don't treat it with arsenic anymore, at least, but in some of the wood that's still up on the shelves in some of the stores is heavily treated with it's treated so that fungus and bacteria can't grow on the wood. And the same things that kill fungus and bacteria will also kill your plants. So if you are using treated wood, treated lumber, which you can see usually because it's got a greenish tinge to it, that's the stuff that I'm not sure I want growing around again, that I want to be growing food crops against. And it's also not the kind of wood that I want kids playing around because of the splinters. So to make a long story even longer, no. Untreated lumber is better than treated lumber. If all you have is treated lumber, don't let that stop you gardening. But if you have the choice, go with untreated lumber. So,
hey, Sally, we've got some good questions about different types of lumber.
Okay.
So someone in the chat mentioned black locust, that they had a lot of great success with black locust, that it's super resistant to rot. And Leslie is wondering, how much longer would cedar last than a different type of wood?
Well, those are really good questions, and I didn't even pay people to ask those. Black locust is not usually something that you can buy easily. Black locust is about the hardest wood in the whole wide world. In fact, if I've heard recommendations that if you're getting sawdust from carpenters so that you can add it to your compost, make sure you don't get black locust sawdust, because it never, ever, ever breaks down. So if you can get black locust lumber, which I have used because I got it from Fairmount Park. I didn't go out into the woods and cut it down, but Fairmount Park was culling the weed trees. They were pulling the weed trees out, and we were able for a couple of years to do school gardens with the wood that they milled from Parkland, and it was black locust, and they did cut it thicker than an inch, and those beds wore out our drills as we were building them, but they did hold out a long time. Cedar, the problem with cedar is they sell you cedar kits, and you're supposed to last a long time, but they cut them to be about a half an inch to maybe a hair thicker than that. And those don't last any longer than 5 years anyway, because they're so thin. if you're getting cedar, get at least a good inch, or if you can get 2-inch cedar, if you can afford it, then the thicker the cedar, the longer it's gonna last. But the really teeny tiny, it's almost like shingles that they put together in kits is not gonna last you that long. So for the extra expensive cedar, I would sooner let my beds wear out at 5 years and redesign and build them again. This was a really cute kit that came, you can make either, it's plastic and it's punches together. Sure it does. This is something that came in pieces and it's very lightweight and it snaps together. And I've had this probably 6 years and it shows no sign of wear. So I'm not thinking that it, there, see how hard it is to put it together? And it snaps together. So I can make this into a compost bin, or I can make it into a bunch of raised beds. Or I could put, I could have one 2 high and one single high because I have enough to make 3 layers. So that's an easy kit. Requires no tools.
What is the name of the kit?
It was called, and it has it written somewhere, BioStack. So it really was originally a compost bin, but I've used it for raised beds and it works really, really, really well. This is something new and kind of cool. These are called big bag beds. I just got some samples. I was hoping that they were made out of recycled plastic bags, but I haven't found that to necessarily be the case. And it's kind of cool. It's about the size of a wading pool and you fill it up with soil. Can you see that? Cassidy, nod and say yes, you can see that or not. Okay, so that is, what's the advantage of that? Well, here's the advantage of that. That's how heavy that is. So not very heavy to move around, as opposed to lumber that you really need the guns for that. So the fun part of that is that it came, I have found one that was 3 feet across. I found one that was 4 feet across. And then this one is a long, thin raised bed. This is when I need minions. It looks like a canoe, but an instant raised bed if you have nothing. And you can put that right on concrete. It's 16 inches deep, and it's kind of cool. Then it's nice because it has ribs in it to keep it from spreading too hard. And again, it weighs absolutely nothing. Now, I read up on these fiber beds, and I thought that they would dry out too fast, and apparently that's not the case. And the fact that they have more oxygen flow to the roots is supposed to improve plant growth. Who knew they needed that? But all of the reviews that I've read said this stuff is fantastic. So I'm going to give it a try this year.
Hey, Sally, what's the name of that specific brand that you have for your bed?
Called, I got the Big Bag Bed Junior, and I'm not getting, I'm not endorsing these brands. I'm trying them out.
It's not a sponsored video.
This is the Big Bag Bed and the Big Bag Bed Junior. And the, I don't see the box for this, so I'm going to go with Big Bag. It's called a fabric raised bed. So I'm giving them a try. They came highly recommended, and the advantage of them is that they weigh nothing. So why is that an advantage? Well, if I'm trying to get beds out to 50 people, guess what? I can put them all in one truck, get them all out, and then have soil delivered. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? I wanted to show this. This is a pallet garden, I guess you could call it, which is 2 pallets nailed together so that it forms a channel. And what I can do, of course it's over on the other side of is either put a burlap sack down here and a burlap sack down there and poke holes in the side so that I can be growing out of the top and I can be growing out of the sides. So good for hanging plants and good for herbs or strawberries or maybe even stick with herbs and flowers on the side and put the big stuff on the top. If you're using pallets, you need to make sure that they are heat treated, not chemically treated. So you're looking for the HT somewhere burned into the pallet. See that? H. Got that?
What does the HT signify?
The HT stands for heat treated. So you know it's not chemically treated. So that was my one idea for, and this is another raised bed that I wanted to show. Can you get this? What? I could also go computer. This is a raised bed that's made on 4 4x4 legs. So the framework is built out of pressure treated. And I think that's okay because it's not touching the plant. And then this is cedar that is left over from fencing material. So it's screwed together. And the nice thing about it is a couple of things. Why would we want that? Well, because some of us are older and are not as good as they used to be. So this is a nice height for me. And the whole thing is put together with ribs on the inside. So this has ribs on the inside, and then it gets screening over it, and then landscape cloth, and then you fill it with soil. So that's compliments of the fence guys. They donated those, so thank you, fence guys. They donated the expertise. So the other thing, I think those are all the examples that I wanted to show, and how to make the corners on a raised bed. So I just wanted to show a few easy ones. One is using, turn it around, using a 4x4 as a stabilizer. You could use a 2x4 in there. This corner is just butt to butt. The 2 pieces of wood are butt to butt. This one uses a shelf bracket. No brainer. You can put that on the outside, you can put that on the inside, and that's what gives the stability to the corner. And this last one, no extra charge for the spotted lanternfly, is a hardware corner that just gets screwed on. So all of these things work. There is no right way. You can buy expensive corners that the lumber fits into. You can do that, but is there a need to? It's entirely up to you. It's entirely what your budget will bear because the plants don't care. Okay, so I wanted to talk about what you put in your raised bed, and I also wanted to talk about the depth of the bed.
Sally, before you jump to that, can you talk about the corners one more time?
Sure. Do you have a specific question about the corners?
Well, I think it's just so people can take notes, but I do want to remind everyone that's with us today, we are recording the session and we'll be able to share the link out of the recording once it's edited. So don't worry about taking notes because you can always come back to this video with the recording. But can you talk about maybe like the purpose of the corners?
The purpose of the corners.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm putting my raised bed together. This is on its side, you know, this is vertical, not horizontal. But what I'm showing you, this is just how the corners go together. They go together that way, they go together that way. I can just put that on top and screw it together, or I could put a 4x4 or a 2x4 in there and screw to it just to make the corners stay square. That's what I want to do. Can I just lay the boards there and fill them with soil? Yes, I can. But the problem is the soil settles and it spreads the wood so that my corners suddenly aren't corners anymore. And they've been pushed away from each other. So the shape of the bed changes and the soil leaks out. So what you want to do if you're doing a neat and tidy job is you're going to make the corners be stable. You can also, like I did here with this corner has a 4x4 in it. Whoa, thank you. Not light. This has a 4x4 in it. You know what? I could bring the computer over here. Let me do that.
Sally, while you're moving your computer, can you tell us, does it matter the size of the wood that you're using for those corner brackets?
For the corner brackets, the bigger it is, the thicker it is, the longer it's going to last. Here's my corner. Can you see that? This is a 4x4, and I have screwed this board into it. I screwed into it, screw and screw, and then I screwed this board to here, and I screwed this board into this, so that there's no way that's going anywhere in the near future. That is solid as a rock. Now, you see that this one's a little bit longer than the board. That, I did that to represent that this could be used as an anchor. You could dig that into the soil, and then that would hold your bed stable. If you were afraid, like you were planting on a little bit of a slope, you could make the legs on one side longer, and that would level out the bed when you're trying to put it on a slope. Did that make sense? Someone say yes.
I'm doing the most dramatic, like 2 thumbs up and a head
Okay,
shaking.
well,
I feel
you went away, so.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so let me get big. Let me get big. All right. So okay, so that makes sense. So this one, let me show you this up close. This is a metal that's a right angle, and you can use that as a shelf, or you could use that in. They use those in construction because it makes it easy. And what it's done is it's screwed on to this piece, and then this screwed onto this piece, so that again we've got stability in the corner, because over time they really will spread out. This one's a shelf bracket and really badly done, but I let someone else do it. But anyway, this is a corner bracket, not a corner bracket. This is a shelf bracket, and you see that would get screwed to the wall, and then a shelf would go on it. So it's pretty strong. And that's also screwed on to keep things solid on the edge. And then this one is just a simple butt to butt, it's called. It's just this. It's just wood like this. And then it's screwed together here. And it just screws right into the side of this. So far so good? We're good?
We're good.
Right. So corners, now what I want to talk about is the depth and what we want. This is plastic lumber. This is the lumber that's made out of recycled plastic bags. I've had this, it is heavy it's heavy. And it doesn't seem to wear out. It's plastic decking, and the stuff is really expensive, and long pieces of it warp. But I got this at, I went to Habitat, the Habitat store, the Habitat for Humanity store. So I was able to get 12 feet for $5 instead of $5 a foot. So I was able to finish my deck, and then I was able to use the leftovers to make some beds, and then I made my little Barbie doll bed for carrying around to show people. So how do we decide how deep the bed's going to be? I want to do a raised bed, and I want to do it on top of my lawn because I have a lawn, and who needs a lawn? Lawns are stupid. I'm a vegetable gardener. I'm not a lawn person. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of my lawn, and I'm going to grow vegetables on it. So I could dig up all of my grass and build the bed and backfill with soil. I could plant right in the soil of my lawn, depending on the quality of it. But what do I do if I want to just put it on the lawn? I want to, I have to get rid of the grass somehow. So the easiest and cheapest way to do that is to build my bed and then cover the grass underneath it with cardboard. You know, it's like corrugated cardboard, the box from your air conditioner that you just bought because it got really hot, or a lot of at least 8 thicknesses of newspaper. I just used some paper bags because suddenly I have a lot of paper bags because we can't use recycled bags at the grocery store right now. So anyway, I used a lot of free stuff that is also, it's paper, it's cardboard, it's made out of cellulose. So if I put that down and then I put soil on top of it, the weight of the soil and the weight of the cardboard will exclude air and light from the grass, and it will kill the grass. Over time, the cardboard paper will break down because it's made out of cellulose. So cellulose is wood pulp. So organic matter, more organic matter, plus the grass that's underneath will rot down. So all of those things will help to enrich the soil, and it will kill off the grass and weeds that are underneath. So if if you want to go the expensive route, you go with a deeper bed and you go with fancy landscape cloth and stuff like that. But I don't bother because they give cardboard away on the street on recycling day. So I use a lot of that. So I'm working on grass. I know that the soil is good, or I know that the soil stinks. So I am going to base the depth of my bed on on the quality of the soil underneath. If I am going to grow just in the bed and I'm going to totally disregard what's underneath, which is what I would do if I'm growing on concrete, or I'm growing on sidewalk, or I'm growing on places where nothing grows, then I need to provide myself with the depth from the bed. I can't rely on what's underneath. I have to build it all up. So I like to use carrots as my guideline. If I like to grow really, really long carrots, well, then I need a really, really deep bed, or I need it to be able to go into the soil that's underneath. If I'm happy with the soil that's there, I could get away with a 2x4 just to show me where the bed is, bring in some more soil, dig up the grass, and grow right in the existing soil. So the deeper beds are needed if there's nothing underneath to go down into, so there's no buffer zone. If the soil that's underneath really sucks and I want to get, I'm going to rely on the soil that I brought in. If the soil underneath is contaminated, I'm not going to want to grow down into that soil. So I'm going to want to have more of a shield than just cardboard if I know that the soil is contaminated. I might put cellar wire. I might put wire down there, or I might put heavy landscape cloth. Something as heavy as these bags. Something as heavy as you mean you should see how heavy that stuff is. That's pretty. I would put that down as a shield because I want to make sure that I'm not digging down in the next time I turn my bed. So if my soil doesn't exist or it's really awful, then I want to have a much deeper bed. Now, I also might want a deeper bed if my knees are not as good as they used to be, which I'm there. So I might build my bed up extra high so they don't have to bend over quite as much. But in any case, each situation is different. So you analyze your situation, you think about the soil, you think about what's underneath, you think about what you want to grow, and then you make your beds accordingly. Now, in the community garden that I'm a part of, I'm part of 2 community gardens because I can't get enough. Both of them have built higher beds. So we had the depth of the bed, and then we doubled it because we have seniors in our gardens and they don't want to have to bend over as far. So in one case, we ended up with a bed that was 3 feet high. And what that brings me around to is, what do we want to put in these beds to make them grow really good stuff? So I'm going to move on to soil unless you've got more questions about specifically about the height of the bed and the shape and the material. Do we want to move on? Cassidy, do we have any good questions that we must have answered before we go on?
I think some of these questions can wait for the Q&A. I've got a number of them bookmarked that are really great. I think one question that's kind of relevant to the grow bag is, if you're going to put a grow bag on the patio, should you put something underneath it to elevate the bag at all?
Well, so that it drains?
I guess either that it drains or I'm not entirely sure. I just thought it was a really good question because I didn't even think about it.
It's going to stay wet underneath. So if what you're concerned about is dampness on the patio because it's wood, then there's really not anything. You can put them on a drainage tray, but it's going to get damp under the drainage tray anyway. So you're always going to have moisture underneath a container on a patio. So get over it, or get yourself some really, really, really good drainage trays that don't get damp underneath. We're going to talk a lot about that next week when we talk about container gardening. So you can stay tuned for that. But get used to it, because it's going to, yes, if you're going to put containers on your patio, it is going to mark your patio. So make peace with it now, or find a different, raise up on legs.
All right, and then
you just have tiny little spots.
One last question before we move on. Sonia's asking, is there like an absolute minimum that you would say for a depth of a bed, or do you really judge it just by what you're growing? Because I know you do the carrot test, but
I would never build a bed that was going to have less than 8 inches of soil. I would just wouldn't bother, because more or less what you have, the soil that's in your bed is your buffer zone, and the less soil you have in your bed, the fast, especially the more surface area you have in relationship to depth, is going to dry out so much faster that you're going to end up with your plants in something less than 8 inches. You're going to end up with your stuff drying out on a daily basis and wilting. So as much depth as you can give it without breaking your back or your pocketbook, that's my recommendation. I mean, without getting ridiculous of getting 3 feet deep just because you need the bulk. No, 3 feet deep is for a different reason. That's because you don't want to bend over.
All right, and I keep saying one last question, but this one's really good.
Hey,
so Zipporah,
they're paying me by the minute, so
keep them coming, right?
Keep them coming.
So Zipporah mentioned that when they tried to stack lumber to build a higher bed, they had trouble getting it to align, so that there were some gaps in between the lumber, which I'm assuming that like maybe soil or something would be able to fall through. Do you have any suggestions or advice if that happens?
When you're building, this guy, remember this guy that has the, this guy that has, wait a minute. I'll break the computer with this lumber. This guy.
That's the 4x4
Wait a minute,
square.
wrong corner. This guy. See how this guy sticks out? To be a foot? I mean, like a leg foot, not a 12-inch foot. If I am making more than one layer, I'm going to have this be much longer so that I can continue to form the wood around it. If the wood's really badly cut or it's warped, you're going to get some spaces in between, but not unless you've got really big spaces. Your soil is, once your soil gets, especially once roots start growing, or you're gonna the soil settles and fungus starts to grow, it starts to hold the soil together, and it's not going to leak out of unless your holes are really big. So any more on soil depth?
All right, so one that I thought of myself is, if you're really having a hard time with getting the lumber to align, would it be smart to maybe put like a piece of lumber in the middle of the long slats to like be able to nail or drill it in?
Depend. Yeah, you could. I'm not sure where we're seeing the gaps. Are we seeing the gaps between the layers like this, or are we seeing the gaps in the corners?
I would imagine that it's the layers like this when you're standing them on top of each other to get the height.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's also an assumption that I'm making.
Oh, no,
it was
also,
not
I have seen people put them together. You have to think about the way you did the corners. Did you do the corner like this, or did you do the corner like this? Because you have to make sure they match. You have to make sure that you have the right, that when you put the beds on top of each other, that they are exactly the same width and length. Because if you mess up the corners and do one corner this way and the other corner this way, and then you try to put them on top of each other, the board might be as much as an inch longer, the second layer. So you have to make sure that you match the corners.
Okay.
I'm hoping that makes sense.
I think it did. It made sense to me. So Sherry is asking for greens like lettuce, maybe like spinach and stuff. Do you really need 8 inches of soil, or could you go less?
Well, lettuce and spinach grow, that little bug just went down my shirt. Oh, when you're growing greens like that, you're growing them in a cooler part of the season when probably you have more rain. So you could conceivably get away with 4 inches of soil for lettuce, but come the heat of summer, you want as much bulk of soil as you can get. So lettuce, spinach, I mean, if you want to be watering it twice a day, fine. But give yourself as much soil as you can give yourself. And then I saw one question go by. I know I'm not supposed to look at the questions, but it was right in the middle of the screen. And that was putting the landscape cloth in. If you're going to line this with landscape cloth when you build your, I'm pointing it over here where you can't see what I'm pointing at. So use your imagination. If you want to line it, can you staple the landscape cloth? Absolutely. Just staple it right in, because once you put the soil in, it's going to push it up against it. It's not going to go anywhere. And I've seen people use landscape cloth in a situation where it wasn't just grass they were growing on top of, but that they had really bad weeds, and they were like, especially switchgrass, because the grass was able to get, I mean, it went right through the bamboo. You don't want it. No, you want, actually you want to nuke, you want to burn it first before you build on top of bamboo. But landscape cloth, staple it in, and the soil, once the soil settles, it'll hold it in place. Okay, so I'm ready to start talking about what kind of soil goes in.
Let's do
And,
it.
we're gonna do it. So the rest of the questions, we'll hold them till the end. So if it were an ideal world, I would have already attended the soil and compost workshop, and I would know all about the magic of 30/70. So for the people who are new and beginners, I'm going to do a soil 101 real quick. The soil that we have here, mainly Philadelphia, is mainly clay. And I mean, you could take it and you could make bacon and make pots and dishes out of it. It's that kind of clay. It has a lot of minerals in it. It has that the plants need. The problem is that the particles were so small that the roots can't get between them, and the water holds everything together really tightly, which is why when you have a lot of clay, it's like slimy almost, because the small pieces. Anyway, but the minerals are in there, and the plants need those minerals, but what they need more is air and water and nutrients. So you've got the chemistry in the soil, but you need a lot of compost. You need a lot of organic matter to add the biology. So you've got the chemistry and the biology, and you put them together. And as we always say, that's where the magic happens. So if I were ordering soil from a nursery, I would ask for a 30/70 mix. I want 30% topsoil and 70% compost. The reason is that will do you for the 5 years till your beds wear out, because you've got enough of the minerals in there, as long as the organic matter from the compost keeps getting added to that and mixed up, which increases the spaces between the particles of soil. And the biology that's going on in there is the critters, the micro critters. Oh, the sun just came around the side of the building. Can't you see? I got a halo. I got a halo anyway. But the little critters are eating the big pieces, and they're pooping out little pieces. And it's the littler the pieces are, the more the plant is able to pull those nutrients out of the soil. So we've got a nice mix of 30% topsoil and 70% compost. So that means next year, all I need to add is compost. And then the year after that, all I need to add is compost. And the year after that, all I need to add is compost, because the volume of the soil never gets much smaller, but the volume of the big pieces being eaten and broken down into the smaller pieces constantly. I mean, you start out with 30/70, and by the end of the year, you're about 50/50. I mean, because this has broken down that much. So I add more compost, and next year, and next year, and next year. So by about the 5th year, it's not a bad idea to bring in a little bit more topsoil with the composts. But the first year that you fill your beds, 30% topsoil, 70% compost. I'm gonna turn the table a little bit before I go blind. No, I'm not, because the computer's hardwired, so I'm not moving it. I'll deal. So can I bring in, all right, around here, we're very lucky because we have access to mushroom compost, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Did you see that in the chat, Sally, or are you just
did,
like,
and it was a
okay.
nice reminder to me.
I thought maybe you were just like so in tune with
psychic.
our audience.
I'm psychic.
Yeah, anticipating needs.
It's true. I'm anticipating everyone's needs. It's what I do. I'm a grandma. But the mushroom compost is what they use to grow mushrooms in, which is mostly horse manure and hay. And the way that it breaks down to feed the mushrooms is makes really the best mix of the micro critters and the organic matter to really make the nutrients easily accessible to the plants. So yes, I did see that question about if you're allergic to mushrooms, then I would guess that you need to be more careful of the soil and your sources of compost, so that maybe you need to, although in this area, most of the topsoil that you buy has been cut with mushroom compost because it's the most easily accessible source of organic matter for the landscape industry, and because it's so good. So if you're one of those people that's allergic to it, I'm sorry, I don't know what is the best thing for you to do about that. And so we get this nice mix of compost, but sometimes now with the deeper beds, those ones that are 3 feet deep, soil's too expensive. So I would, sorry, there's a cat under there. When I'm working with deeper beds, I put all kind of crap in the bottom, because really remember we talked about you got to have at least 8 inches of soil. Well, I'll tell you, most of the roots are going to be within that 8 inches. Well, here we'll go 8 inches of soil of the top. So the stuff that I put in the bottom of the beds, okay, all right. One time, somebody dumped mannequins on our block, and so we had arms and legs and heads, and we filled the bottom of the tall beds with those, and because they took up a lot of space and we didn't know what to do with them, so we put them in the bottom of the beds. And a couple years later, people redid the beds and we weren't there, and they found heads in the bed and they were very disturbed. So I highly recommend putting your mannequins in the bottom of the beds. Or, you know, trash from the yard. Last time I did it, I used up all the leftover Christmas greens from the workshops. I added old boards and things like that. And it all eventually settles down, but it takes up a lot of space that would otherwise need to be filled with expensive soil. So no need to put good stuff in the bottom of your bed if your beds are more than a foot. If you're going to do a foot tall bed, then if you're going to go with that, then go with decent soil. So back to I want to say something else about the mushroom compost. They put terrible chemicals in the mushrooms that they grow if you're not buying organic mushrooms. Just know that, which is why I'm an absolute fanatic to only and all of the nurseries in this area specifically go to the Laurel Valley is our organic source of, they're not a sponsor, so I'm not saying you got to buy them, but know that we have tested them multiple times, and they are totally organic in the way they grow their mushrooms, and the mushroom compost that we get then comes without any antibiotics or treatment in it that's not organic. So can you use peat moss in your raised beds? I
will say peat moss is great if you have things that you're growing that like acidic soil. So like blueberries like acidic soil, and you could use peat moss for that if it's going to change the pH of your soil at all. But I would say otherwise compost feels like a safer bet.
I don't like to use peat moss because it's really not a renewable resource. And so, I mean, they say, oh, it's in the peat bogs of Canada and blah, 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 but it's really, really, really slow growing. So to constantly be using peat moss when we could be using other things, I like, compost is better. It's, and not only is compost better because it's a renewable resource, but if you're making your own compost, you're keeping your garbage out of the landfill. So you get a win-win situation. You're using your garbage and you're using it again in your garden. So go with that. Peat moss, they're using, a lot of the soil mixes now are using the coconut coir, which is ground up coconut hulls, which is indeed a renewable resource, because coconuts, I mean, they keep throwing that stuff away and they bring it in by the boatloads. So it's a lot, it's the transportation is the issue. So, but people, if you're asking about the peat moss in the beds because you want to use bagged soil in your beds, bagged soil, I'm turning around because I'm looking at some bagged soil. You can't see that. But I find that most of the bagged soil is too lightweight. So it dries out way faster than regular compost. But if your soil seems particularly heavy, you can certainly cut it with bagged soil. But the bagged soil is generally very, very, unless you're getting the stuff like, all right, if you're going to go with and we'll talk about this next week with the container gardening, if you're going to go with bagged soil, go with the expensive stuff that the pot growers use, because it is really high in nutrients. But as far as filling your beds with bagged soil, that's the stuff that goes in the bottom of the bed. If you're adding the stuff that's got like the polymers in it that keep it from drying, that keep it moist, well, I've used that, and then it rained forever and they never dried out. So best to go with topsoil and compost mix. Cut a little with the bagged soil if your soil is particularly heavy. But I mean, if all you've got is bagged soil, then go with it. But if all you've got is bagged soil, you've got some really sterile stuff. What you need to do is to make sure you get a bucket of compost from somebody else. So just like sourdough starter is so popular right now, go with getting a starter from somebody else so that you can get those micro critters in there and get them chomping on your words. Words are good. Breaking down the organic matter and making it into digestible pieces for the for your plant roots. So, boy, I used a whole lot of words that probably weren't necessary there, and beat it to death. So, compost and topsoil. 30% topsoil, 70% compost. If it's too heavy, cut it with a little bit of bagged soil. I don't know why you would want to add peat moss to your beds, but if it's what you got, then add it. It's not going to kill you. It's certainly not going to kill the plants.
Pam is asking how often you should feed your soil and how much compost you should use.
All right. So I am a firm believer in compost, and I'm moving again. Hey, you get to see my little round window. Isn't that the coolest thing? It opens into a Harry Potter closet on the inside. I add compost in the spring and to my raised beds, and I add compost when I plant something. I throw compost in. I water them with compost tea. So either from my worm bin or out of the bottom of the worm bins are the best for compost tea. Otherwise, I take compost and I add it to the soil. Worm compost is a different animal entirely. It is so much more nutrient dense that what I want to do instead is either sprinkle it like chicken feed as a fertilizer on the soil, or I want to take a handful of it and throw it in a bucket of water and water with it. So in the fall, I add more compost. When the level of the beds drops, I add more compost. So compost is my go-to so that I very rarely have to use any kind of additional fertilizer, except for when I'm, just planting new plants and they've been stressed. I might add something, a soluble, if I don't have enough worm compost.
So I think the important thing here is that there's no like specific
no right answer.
Yeah, there's no right answer. It's really about experimenting to see what works for you and like your rhythm in your garden. And then Elaine is asking, what is a worm bin? A worm bin is literally a bin full of worms and soil that you're adding in your kitchen, your garbage. Yeah, you're adding in your kitchen scraps, and the worms will break it down, decompose it, and then you can use that broken down material as compost. Any liquid that's been drained out, you can use as compost tea, which Sally was referring to earlier, as a liquid fertilizer. Where do you get the worms? Sally and I always say Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. And I can link it for everyone. The other thing is, just like a sourdough starter, again, if you have a friend that has a worm bin, have them just scoop out some worms and give them to you, because it's free and it's fun.
Yeah, just know that the worms that come up in your soil by themselves are earthworms. And the worms that you put in a worm bin are compost worms or garbage worms or red wiggler worms, all the same thing. They are different animals. So you don't want to put regular earthworms in your worm bin because they can't eat the garbage fast enough and it will smell really, really, really rank. So worm bin worms versus earthworms. Earthworms go in the earth. Garbage worms go in the worm bins.
And also, we are doing a workshop later in the month all about feeding your soil, talking about doing your own compost pile. I'm sure we'll talk a bunch about worms then too. So if you haven't already registered for that one, now's a good time to do that. You
get to see the really rank side of my yard because we're going to put the camera right into the compost bin.
A nice close-up, yeah.
Yeah,
thanks to
clean
Stanley.
Up around it though. Yeah. We'll make Stanley do that because it's why we pay him the big bucks. So we were talking about the different kinds of soil. So we talked about what to put in it, and we talked about, I think people are still asking questions though about putting bagged soil in the compost bins. So we're going to save those questions. We'll come back to that in the Q&A at the end. Cassidy, what can you, I'm looking around at my props and I'm trying to think of what kind of, how is raised bed gardening different than in the ground gardening? Not a whole lot of difference, except that what you've done is you've made a beautiful artwork and you put a frame around it. So it's the same artwork, but now it's framed. It's a little bit easier to grow in a raised bed because your soil, you have more control over your soil. And it's all a matter of control, because it's so much easier to wrap your head around a raised bed because it's a very discrete shape, and it's really easy then to deal with kids in a raised bed because they know, oh, you know what, Cassidy, I don't believe this. We made it all the way to 505 and did not ever say, never put your feet in the bed.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I'm mortified that we got this far. Okay, the entire purpose of growing in raised beds is so that you never, ever, 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 ever put your feet in the bed. Because what happens when you step on that soil? Well, you compress it. I don't know about you. It's like a size 9 foot. With my weight, it's doing some serious compressing on the soil. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that your beds meet the beds have to match the size of your body. Okay, you gotta be able to reach all the way into the bed from one side or the other, because that's why we like the 4 foot wide bed, because everybody's arms, I don't know about your arms, that's a cubit. If you can't reach it from one side, you can run around to the other side and reach it from the other side. If it is 5 feet wide or 6 feet wide, you're not going to be able to reach the middle, and you're gonna step in the bed. And that is the number one rule for all raised bed gardening, is keep your feet out of the bed. So, and that's the reason that I don't like them any longer than 8 or 10 feet. Because if I got to go around to the other side and I got to go around a long bed, I'm going to step through the bed. And again, that compresses the soil. You compress the soil, there's no room for air, there's no room for moisture. And so the roots have a harder time getting through compressed soil. So you don't want to do that. If you are doing a raised bed that is more for aesthetics, and it's kind of organically installed in your yard, I mean, wood is very rigid, so you might want to use stones for the edging, and that way you can curve the bed to make it be much more aesthetically pleasing to a specific, in a specific yard. And so if you're going to have to walk through the bed, then install yourself some pavers so that you're walking on the pavers, because it redistributes your weight. So instead of all of your weight going in a space this big, the bigger the stone, it's spread out over that much, and it doesn't compress the soil quite as much. So do raised beds make it any less critters? No. You're not going to have less insect issues. You're not going to have less. Your groundhog is going to climb up into the bed. The groundhog will climb up onto the stinking table and eat your stuff. Groundhogs can climb. Rabbits burrow under, groundhogs burrow under, all of that. It's no different, raised beds versus in the ground. The other thing, the fun thing about wooden structures is that you can attach all kinds of other stuff to it. So if I've got a raised bed, made out of wood, it's really easy to add a trellis to it, or to screw lattice work onto the side, or to put arches on it so that you can cover it with row cover to keep or insect netting to keep the insects out. So that's when raised beds are particularly fun. So not just for raising your soil up, but for making it easier to build structures in your garden.
One question that we got a number of times at the very beginning was, is it too late to start growing in a raised bed? Which I was so quick to say, no, it is never too late to be growing, because even if you maybe missed the mark on being able to grow all of your tomatoes and peppers for the summer.
It is not too late for tomatoes and peppers.
Yeah.
4th of July, you got till the 4th of July to get them in.
Still get them in, but
Actually,
you can always be planting like your fall crops. If you're going to start them from seed, get them in now. And even in the fall, it's not too late, because you know how many like leafy winter crops you can be growing in the winter? Get it? Like, it's never, never, never too late. How can you make sure that like really invasive city weeds, think like, what are they called? Are they called polonias? Is it too strong to say?
Are they the big? They're the
trees. The trees. Yeah. But like a really bad city weed, like a Polonia, for example.
No. Much worse is the paperbark mulberry.
Oh yeah, well that's a whole other story.
I have seen people totally stop gardening because what they do is that they're like bamboo. They spread from under the runners, and they grow under the ground. So you really have to use a strong landscape fabric, several thicknesses, and put it down. I've seen people put it down and staple it to the outside of the bed, so there's no creeping up in the corners to get in it.
Yeah. Because that's
but-
the question is like, how do you make sure that those invasive weeds are not going to grow through your bed?
What I've done, and because right now I'm dealing I'm started a new garden where there was bamboo before, and I have had to tear out all of the roots of the bamboo. I mean, by the time I was done digging a bed, I had as big a pile of roots as I had of soil. What I have done is made sure that outside of the bed, I put a border of about a foot where I dug down and dug out the roots of that, so that there's a buffer zone of at least a foot between wherever those roots are and the outside edges of my bed. So I did a lot of digging up roots. The nice thing about raised beds is that you are keeping your soil nice and loose, so that the majority of weeds that are coming in from seed. They're not coming up out of the ground. They're coming in from above. They're blowing in. And if you're keeping your soil well fed and loose, they're so easy to pull out. And again, you've got this visual, I got a bed this big, and it's so easy for me to know that in 15 minutes I can pull all of the weeds of that, and I just don't keep going and going and going as I would if I were working in an in-ground bed.
Kelly is asking if we have any advice about growing squash vertically in a raised bed, of course. Which is just to say, trellising.
It depends on what kind of squash you're growing.
Mm-hmm.
There's two different kinds of squash. Well, there's lots of different kinds of squash, but there's two different growth habits of a squash. One is the zucchini, zucchini summer squash. Generally, they creep along the ground. They do not climb. So some of the squash, and especially the gourds and pumpkins, they will either have tendrils on them or will twist around. Those are the ones that you can grow vertically. To grow a zucchini vertically is not going to happen. And I've seen people get really frustrated, but they're not climbers. So you got to know which ones are climbers and which ones are not climbers, and do them with the trellis. Now, I have, in a really tall raised bed, seen squash get so heavy that they pulled their roots up out of the soil and fell out of the bed. So be careful with your really tall raised beds, that if you're going to have your pumpkins and big squash, like butternut squash, hanging down out of the side, support the fruit in some way if it looks like it's going to start pulling the plant up out of the soil.
All right. And then next questions are all about pest control in raised beds.
Uh-huh.
I think a blanket statement is always
No different.
netting, like use netting, use row cover.
You're going to try to be proactive.
Yeah, you're going to try to be proactive. You're going to try to figure out what exactly your pest is, especially if it's like a small insect or beetle kind of deal. We have no good advice other than that. But Liz K is asking, how well do those fabric grow bags keep critters like groundhogs and rabbits away? Like, would a groundhog or a rabbit be able to chew through that fabric bag?
Oh, heck yeah.
So do you think maybe then like a bed out of lumber is better?
No, they can chew through. We're talking about planters instead of raised beds?
No, I'm talking raised bed.
Oh, we're still talking raised beds. Okay. Is it going to keep a groundhog? Is probably not going to chew through that. It's going to climb up into that. I'm looking at my neighbor's porch right here. There was a groundhog on her porch yesterday. There was a groundhog on the other porch yesterday. Generally, the mom comes across our porch to get to the babies over there and the babies over there. Groundhogs, they can climb a fence.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to chew through your bed. They're gonna climb in. So,
and then what about slugs in raised beds, especially if your bed is made out of lumber? I know you can like kill a slug by pouring salt on it, but are there any preventative measures?
Yeah, you don't want to do that because you get a lot of slugs and a lot of salt, and you're starting to ruin your soil. So that's not it's. Do you get more slugs in a raised bed than in maybe? You deal okay. Really hardly any differences that I can think of between dealing with your insects and pests in your raised beds versus insects and pests in your in-ground beds. Slugs like damp, slugs like shade, so they're gonna want to be, and they like moist soil. So all of those different things are going to be in ground gardening, and you're gonna have them in your raised beds. So easy. I mean, there's lots of different ways to deal with slugs. There's the beer, you put a bottle of stale beer. They in fact like, I'm told they like Miller Lite is their favorite.
Isn't Miller Lite? I think Miller Lite is the champagne of beer. So they are high quality pests if they really like Miller Lite.
But not Miller Lite. I mean, Miller Lite. I mean, Stanley drinks Miller Lite. But anyway, but he cooks good curry. So we're not gonna, and he shows up every week with the camera. So we're not gonna make fun of him.
Yeah, don't knock the cameraman.
Don't knock the cameraman. So beer, because they go for the yeast in it and they drown. There's I've heard there are copper slug rings. I've never tried them. They supposedly don't like the copper.
Crystal mentioned them in the chat.
Pardon?
And Crystal mentioned the copper slug rings in the chat that they got from Lee Valley and said that they're working well for them. So
are they a big thing or a little thing?
Little.
I mean, they're little. Okay. So they must not like the copper, because I've also had copper nails suggested, scattering them around. What I found works really well, two things that work really well. One is you put down a piece of plywood in the day and in the night. They come out. They like to come out at night. They come out and they do their thing. And then when the sun comes up, they find some convenient shade. They really like the underside of plywood. So you put the plywood down, and then or a plank or something, they go under it. And then in the morning you flip it over, and that's when you sprinkle salt on them or squish them. Like I said before, we have a sacrificial rock in our garden. So that's where everything goes to get squished. The third thing is slug bait. There are pellets and there are crumbles, and I would always recommend using the crumbles. I lift up the plywood and I sprinkle the crumbles underneath that. I don't like the pellets because the birds seem to like the pellets, and I don't want to cry. I don't know that it hurts the birds, but I'm not taking any chances. So the crumbs underneath, it's slug getter or something like that. All of those things. Slugs are a way of life. Diatomaceous earth is another thing that I've seen people use, because it's ground up little sea creatures, very sharp edges. So putting that in a ring around your plants, they have to climb over it, and it sticks to their slimy underbellies. So that's another thing.
Maxine is saying eggshells if you crush the eggshells, that's another great solution. That's also good for putting calcium back in the soil.
Yeah, and it's a good use of eggshells. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. Sally, one thing I wanted to talk about, because I feel like we always talk about garden pests, but we never talk about like what are good insects that you want to be attracting to your garden. Like someone mentioned pill bugs in the garden bed, but pill bugs aren't bad. They're kind of essential.
I mean, there have been years when there are so many pill bugs pill bugs are a natural part of the composting process. So in your compost bin, they're fine. If they get to be in your garden too much, get a piece of cantaloupe, put a piece of cantaloupe down or some sort of fruit on a plate. They will go right to it. You scoop it up, dump them in the compost bin where they'll do some good. But like I said, they're opportunistic. They don't actually destroy your, damage your strawberry, but if somebody else takes a bite out of your strawberry, they're going right in that hole and going to hollow it out. And then you're going to see them and you're going to blame them. So pill bugs are okay. Okay, so what are the good guys? Of course, everybody knows about the praying mantises and the ladybugs and the
Pollinators.
pollinate, all the different pollinators, and then all of the parasitic ones that eat the bad guys. And I want to introduce you to something I don't know the name of, but I know it's a good guy. I had aphids really bad on my collard greens, and when I went, I was going to go and spray, you know, the two pesticides that organic, the go-tos are Safer Soap, which is for sucking insects. And then there's neem, and that's for chewing insects. So neem is no good on aphids. It's for the bugs that chew, and they have to actually eat it. And so you spray it on the plant, and they eat it, and it kills them. The soap, you spray it on them, and just like soap works to take the coating off the virus, that's why we have to wash our hands with soap for 20 seconds. The soap gets on the bodies of the soft-bodied insects that are sucking, and it messes up their everything because it's soap. So it either messes up their digestion, or it messes up their breathing, or it starts to dissolve their outer coating. So what was the point of this? Oh, okay. So I had aphids, and they're sucking insects, not chewing insects. So I got out my Safer Soap and I went to spray them. But I noticed that some of the aphids were no longer like translucent. They were more opaque, and they were almost pearly looking. So I looked it up, and I found out that those are being parasitized by a very, 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 very small, you know it's small if it's smaller than the aphids, critter that gets in them, reproduces, explodes, and eventually affects all of the aphids and cleans out the aphid population. So if you start to see aphids that are pearly, pearlescent, I guess is a good word, leave them alone. Don't be bothering them. Safer Soap is, this Safer Soap that I'm talking about is a really, really, really strong soap that is so strong that it's insecticidal. So it's called Safer Soap is the brand name. Insecticidal soap is the generic term for it. So the praying mantises, there's an argument going on about the ones that make the big fat egg cases are the Chinese ones, and the ones that make the long skinny egg cases are the American ones, but they both do a good job of eating other bugs. They're not fast enough to get rid of all of the spotted lanternfly, but they do a pretty good job. I saw one once eating a cicada, and the cicada screamed the whole time. I mean, that whole for an hour and a half. So they do a good job of eating anything that they can catch. Ladybugs, I was surprised to find so many ladybugs naturally occurring in my garden. The young, which look like little alligators, they're tiny and black and a little bit white, long and skinny, and they look like little alligators. They are also called antlions, and not antlions, aphid lions. They eat aphids. And so they can eat an awful lot of aphids in a day. Ladybugs themselves, the adults that are the red and black ones that we know, or orange and black, they eat a lot, but the larva form, the ones that look like alligators, they're really, really effective. They don't like my greenhouse. It's too hot for them in there. But other than that, they're all out there. Now, supposedly there's an invasive one and there's a non-invasive one, but effectively they all eat aphids. So I appreciate all comers. I mean, they're the invasive ones. It's not like they're killing off other insects, but they get really annoying because they'll come in your house in the winter. And so people are a little skeeved by them. So what are the other good bugs? All of the pollinators. So we always plant lots of pollinator attractors in our gardens. A lot of bright, because it looks so good in the garden that it's like your reward for coming out and doing some work in the morning. And it's also, it attracts those bugs, and then those bugs, while they're there, they said they might as well pollinate, your squash and your other plants. So we like to invite them in with their bright colors and all of that. And then while they're there, they might as well pollinate all our stuff. So I'm trying to think of what else is useful in the garden. Here's a surprise to me. I hate wasps and yellow jackets with a passion. And yet I had the green worms on my cabbage and broccoli and collards, and I watched the yellow jacket come in and carry off the green worm. And I was astounded and very pleased. So I guess we all have our niche in life. So we get used to, I still haven't figured out a good use for the mosquito. There's no way that would ever get on my beneficial list. But I was surprised to see the yellow jackets and wasps carry away. So they did do a good job. So I had to give them credit for that. Mosquitoes, on the other hand, and we got to go right to those because mosquitoes are horrible right now. I just smashed one on my screen. They breed in standing water. So we have to be, meticulous is not the word, fanatical. We have to be absolute fanatics to make sure that there's no standing water anywhere on your property, on your neighbor's property, down the street. You really have to keep an eye on that because they breed. I had them in my cat water in the house because I hadn't changed the cat water in 3 days. That fast. I had little squigglies in it. So what can you do? You can, to deal with the mosquitoes, you can prevent them from laying the eggs in your water by A, making sure there is no water, or B, excluding, putting netting or a lid or something on your rain barrels to make sure that they cannot get in. Now, I was very surprised to see I was being a nutcase about making sure that that the screen was on the top, and those suckers went in through the overflow and laid eggs. So I still had them in there. So the third thing you need to do is you got to interrupt their life cycle. So the easiest way to do that is to buy those donuts, the BT, Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis. They're those little donuts, and you float them on in your barrels or in your wading pools or in your bird baths or something like that. Know that it's not the volume of the water, it's the surface of the water, the surface area of the water. So I'm going to need more for my wading pool, which is 3 feet across, but only this deep, than for my 55-gallon drum, which is, this big at the top, but very deep. So there's more volume of water in that, but I need more to keep it on the surface. And the other easy thing to do, but you have to replenish this after every rain, is to put a little drop of oil, vegetable oil, not car oil or but vegetable oil on the surface of wherever you know you're going to have water. You don't want to put that in the bird bath, but you might put that in your rain barrel, because what happens is those little squigglies that are under the water, they mature and they turn into mosquitoes, adult mosquitoes. So they climb up on the surface and they stand there on their 6 little legs and wait for their wings to, their wings emerge from their bodies and they dry. And so they're standing on the surface tension of the water. And what happens is, if there's a little bit of oil on the water, they get oil on their wings and their wings never dry and they get tired of standing there waiting and they drown. Oh, it's so sad. But so there are lots of different ways to deal with the mosquitoes, but you gotta be fanatical about it because those suckers are suckers. I mean, they will suck your blood and they're not fun. And they carry diseases. So that brings me to my last least favorite insect. I know we were talking about good insects and nobody asked about this yet, but I have now for the 4th time in 2 weeks come home from the garden and had deer tick climbing, just walking on my, so you need to be very observant. And when you come in from the garden, if you know you've got a tick problem, yes, strip down and shower and put on clean clothes every time you come back from the garden. Enough said about the bugs. So
yeah. I did want to jump back to raised bed questions specifically, and see if anyone
I kind of got off on a riff there. So,
well, we started with raised beds. It was pest control connected to raised beds, but then we did get away from it. But I wanted to see if people had specifically raised bed questions, because if not, then we can jump into, I know Maxine was asking about grapes and if we can help you troubleshoot, and some other people were asking about different, like specific to their gardening situations. So we can use the rest of our time for that if we don't have any more raised bed questions, but I just wanted to get those out of the way first. All right. Crystal is asking if there's any good solutions to grow cantaloupes and watermelons in raised bed for small spaces. We would just say trellising, which we talked about before.
Trellising, support the weight of the fruit, and look for varieties that say they are smaller. I mean, shorter vines. I mean, there are certainly cucumbers that are specifically for containers, and those are a good bet for a small, to take up small space, or grow them around the edges and let them run or let them climb.
And then Lisa's asking about composting. You can compost. I always do it in the beginning and at the end of the season. And if I have extra compost on hand, maybe I'll do it in the middle of the season. There's really no right or wrong to it.
Good answer.
Kelly's asking, specific to raised bed planters, are there good rules for rotating?
That's a hard one because, well, I mean, if you are, yes and no, let's say that. Same as in the ground. If you are able to rotate. So that means if you've got, if all you've got is one raised bed, one 4x4 raised bed, there's no way that you're going to ever be able to rotate. So to make sure that you clean out your bed at the end of the season, to make sure you take away all the bad, all the leftover vegetation. If you have had an issue with any particular disease, like say tomatoes, and the early blight from the bottom or the late blight from the top, and the plants are make sure that you take away those plants and any leaves that have fallen, and tidy, send that to landfill. Don't put that in your compost. So cleanliness is a good rule of thumb. The second is compost, because it is the great buffer, is about the best thing that you can do if you can't rotate. Just keep adding compost, because it covers a multitude of sins. If you get to the point where you can't grow one particular thing, mostly you see this show up in tomatoes. because a disease has built up in the soil, then you start growing them in a container or you build a new bed and bring in new soil. But as far as rotating things because of it uses, I mean, some are heavy users of nutrients. So if you're if you're afraid that you're growing squash, squash is a heavy feeder and it's taking all the nutrients, then what you're adding is you're adding compost, and that's putting the nutrients back in the soil. So it's hard to rotate when you have a small garden. Doesn't really matter whether you're in a raised bed or you're in the ground. If you are in a small garden, it's hard to rotate. And the other thing you got to do is to grow resistant varieties if you see you started to get a disease. Bugs and diseases really like monoculture. So if you've got lots of, I mean, all you're growing is tomatoes or all you're growing is cold crops, then you're going to get lots and lots of bugs, where you would get less if you mix and match. But nothing makes that white butterfly happier than, that's the cabbage butterfly, than seeing a solid bed of cabbage, collards, broccoli, all in one bed, because it doesn't just flit. It doesn't have to work very hard. Covers the whole thing with eggs, and then you get the green worms. So rotating is hard. You do what you can. Somebody had asked earlier, and I don't know if we totally got it answered, and that was using barriers. Where we were talking about covering things with with bug netting. It's the same as mosquito netting, and yeah, it's pretty effective for put little arches. You can buy the arches, or you can collect them after elections. They're not arches then, they're shaped like this and they say vote for, but you take those and bend them, make yourself a little tunnel and cover it with insect cloth. But the trick is you gotta do it immediately after you plant stuff, because if you wait a while, then chances are good that the butterfly's already been there, or the aphids have already gotten there, or the Harlequin bee bugs are already there. And once they're there, once you miss one, what you've done by covering them is protected them from the elements and from the birds and from the yellow jackets coming in. So do get the covers on as soon as you plant.
Hi. When do you remove that netting? Because at one point things need to be pollinated, right?
Well, it depends on what you're covering. I use it on my on squash, and that's the only thing that I worry about getting pollinated, because you need the bees. You need the bees to come in and do that. So you do. What I do is I keep the netting on until I see female flowers. I think we talked about this last week if you were here. The difference between a male flower and a female flower on a squash or a cucumber. Male flower has a skinny little stem behind it. Female flower has a whole fruit behind it. So generally the plant puts out about a dozen male flowers. Just practicing. It puts them out, and then once you start to see female flowers after a bunch, that's when you would take the netting off. Because what I'm trying to keep off the squash and cucumbers, I'm trying to keep the cucumber beetles off, and I'm trying to keep the squash borers off. Once the plant is mature enough to have all those female flowers on it, it's pretty much not going to get destroyed by those bugs. It's when the bugs get in, when the plant is small and really get established, that that they're able to kill the plant. It's difficult for there to be, I mean, you really have to have a strong infestation to kill an adult plant. As far as keeping the cover off of, the cover over broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage and those things, they don't ever need to get pollinated. So they never need to be exposed to insects.
someone was saying that their dill plants are getting kind of long and the stems are just folding in the middle, and they noticed a bug.
The only bug that I see generally on dill
Is the
is those little
butterflies.
caterpillars that turn into butterflies, and we like them. They're not a beneficial, but they're so darn pretty.
Mhm.
Those are the generally the blue swallowtails, those really big, bigger than monarchs with the long skinny tail on them. Those are on the dill, the fennel, the parsley. Generally, they're called parsley worms. But when a dill gets tall and lanky, it's getting mature, and it is. I would guess it got bent over because of the rain or because of wind, both of which we've had in plenty recently. So unless you see an actual bug on them, Maxine, they look pretty darn good to me. I don't know what you're worried about. Show me a really ugly
You
one.
see how they got holes in them? This one.
Oh, yeah, well, they got, okay. What is coming soon to a grapevine near you on your roses are Japanese beetles, but I haven't seen any of them yet. So they look pretty healthy to me. There are different beetles that will start to chew so you'll get a piece of leaf that looks a little bit like lace. But unless they're eating 3/4 of your leaves, it's not going to be of any consequence to the plant itself. And it's certainly not going to hurt the grapes.
Oh, okay.
So you said you saw a beetle on it
Yeah.
that looked like a ladybug, but I bet it was a whole lot bigger.
Yes.
Yeah, those
It-
are,
it- They black with look like red shiny coating on the top.
black.
Yeah, it's a black.
Yeah, usually they're tan with spots on them, if they're black. But you
Spots
saw
on.
one, not a lot of them.
I saw one, not a lot of them.
Yeah, I think it was just somebody migrating through.
Oh, okay.
Was it big, like a quarter?
No, actually, it was small, like a half a dime, maybe.
Okay, I wouldn't get too concerned about it if there was just one. And how long ago did you see it? 5 years or 3 weeks?
Today. No,
Oh,
today.
today?
Yeah, I had perused the camera around it while y'all were
Uh-huh.
talking. And I don't know if Cassie saw it or not.
No, I saw you moving it around, but I couldn't get
And then I had a black one with green spots.
black one with green spots, but
Like
not
lime
shiny
colored.
iridescent.
Iridescent green spots.
But
Like-
no, I mean, it was just like,
Like a what do you call it? A lime color green spot. Look like.
I don't know. So, you know what? If you take a picture, you can email it to us and we'll get somebody to ID it for you.
So I think our last question then is going to be for Leah, is asking about their potatoes, that the stems and the leaves are wilting.
They're
Um,
wilting. All
And I
of
feel
them
like
or just a
it's
couple?
too soon, because normally when your potato leaves are wilting, that's how you know they're ready to harvest. But I feel like it might be too soon for them to be harvested, right?
No, this is actually, guys, this is actually the new growth. Just like a few tips of new growth. It's like from one day to the next. So it seems really unusual. Well,
Sounds to me like somebody's burrowing.
uh-oh.
Yeah, so pull one up and see.
Uh-oh.
We're all getting dusted for, we're all getting sprayed for. Mosquitoes. There, we're all, okay, no more mosquitoes for any of us.
Are these the kind of stuff that would burrow on their stems or?
No, I'm thinking like mice or somebody was digging under the ground. But it's the brand new growth?
No, it's a brand new growth and they're actually in buckets. So nothing is
Oh,
really.
okay, so it's kind of unlikely. But if the new growth, check the drainage and make sure that they're draining properly.
Okay.
I mean, if you have holes in it, poke something through the holes to make sure that there is actually not water collecting in the bottom of in the bottom.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it just seems like bits of it. And I think at some point I might have sprayed with BT and maybe even
Well, there's nothing on the, and BT is very specific to caterpillars. So if you don't have caterpillars on it, there's no need for BT unless you're using the BT that goes in water, and that's for mosquitoes. So BT as a general insecticide is not necessary and not useful.
oh, okay.
Yeah. A quick,
I thought I had something that was burrowing through the
oh,
the
yeah, once
stems.
it's burrowing through the stems, BT is not going to do anything for it either. So now I don't know of anything that burrows through the stems. I would think that it's more a water problem. But you mean they're like the new growth is just going like that?
Yeah, it's not, it's sort of like wilting, like it doesn't have enough, like maybe it doesn't have enough water, but only some tips and not the whole plant looks great,
How big
flowering
is
and
the
everything.
container it's in?
It's 5 gallons.
5 gallons. Well, I would suggest taking pictures and
I
sending
will.
them to Ask a Gardener.
I will.
Now, I am now, of course, this is, I'm using this thing called No Mosquitoes with the OZ, No Mosquitoes, which has citronella oil, lemongrass oil, cedarwood oil, olive oil, coconut oil, and blah, 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 blah. It also has isopropyl alcohol in it. I don't know if it's enough to wash my hands with, but it's pretty effective, but it doesn't last forever. So if I'm out in the garden an hour, I'll use it twice. You saw me, I sprayed it at the beginning of the class on my ankles, and I just had to spray it again. The mosquitoes just descended in a cloud.
So Crystal's asking, is it true that lemon and lime balm are mosquito repellents? Which I'm pretty sure it is. However, I will say, I think they say that any herb that's really fragrant is a mosquito repellent. However, my whole back patio is all very fragrant things.
It has to be squish, squish, rub, rub.
Okay. So
there's
just
nothing that you can put there that is going to keep them away.
Mm-hmm.
What we use on our porch, I mean, we have sage that we burn because they don't like the smoke and they don't like moving air. So a fan blowing across your legs as I'm sitting here would be great. Out in the garden, incense is not going to help. But anything with an essential oil that you can crush and rub on yourself will work for as long as the essential oils, and still once they're expressed into the air, then the mosquitoes will come back. So you need to just keep using it over and over. Basil's great for that. Mint is great for that. I just saw our garlic and onion. Oh, I wouldn't want to rub that on because ew.
I feel like that would smell like straight up BO, but you know what?
I mean,
feel
it would
like if
probably
anything,
work. I mean, if you're if you're quarantined, who cares? Rub it all over yourself and eat it as well, because supposedly if you eat a lot of garlic and onions, then it's expressed through your skin, and it tends.
It's also really good for your immune system, though. So in this era of COVID, eat all the garlic you can.
Yeah, eat all the garlic.
Eat it all.
I mean, as long as everybody else in your house is good with it.
Mm-hmm. Make sure that they really love you. This will be the true test.
Thank you for that, Cassidy. All right. Yeah. B vitamins, eating the B vitamins also makes you stink to the mosquitoes. So any of those things that you can eat, but you know what? I've tried them all and there is nothing that beats these mosquitoes. And I am constantly, I mean, when I go to the garden, I spray DEET on my ankles because it's not close to my face. I'll spray the organic stuff on and keep reapplying it. But the off, I use off, Deep Woods off on my ankles, because that also is not pleasant to the ticks. And the other thing I do is I pull my socks up over my pant legs. I put on socks, tall socks, and I pull them up over my pant legs just to keep the ticks and the mosquitoes off my ankles while I'm gardening, because they are ruthless. And speaking of ruthless, I think it's time to be done. What time is it? It is 6:05. We have gone so far over. So thank you, everybody, and be safe. Wear a mask.
Mm-hmm.
Be careful. Be healthy. Be kind. And be back next week.